Henry VIII. Best known for his 6 marriages and initiating the English Reformation, Henry VIII was a controversial English monarch who had a love for drink, women, and having people executed. Henry VIII was born on the 28th of June, 1491, in the Palace of Palencia in England. He was the 3rd child and 2nd son of King Henry VII and Elizabeth of York. Only 3 of Henry's siblings survived infancy: Arthur, Margaret, and Mary. Henry was not expected to become king, so not much is known or recorded of his childhood. He did receive an excellent education and was fluent in Latin and French. In 1501, Henry's older brother Arthur married Catherine of Aragon, one of the daughters of Ferdinand II of Aragon and Isabella I of Castile. The following year, Arthur died of the sweating sickness, and Henry was named heir to his father. He was created Prince of Wales in 1504. Henry was given very few responsibilities even after Arthur's death and was untrained in being a king as a result. Henry VII offered Henry in marriage to Catherine to seal an alliance between England and Spain, which was supported by both sets of parents. A papal dispensation was issued by the Pope, which stated that even if Catherine and Arthur had consummated the marriage, Henry and Catherine could be wed. The young prince and princess were formally engaged on the 23rd of June 1503. Issues soon arose when relations between Henry VII and Catherine's father deteriorated. Catherine was living in England and her position was left in limbo, especially when Prince Henry rejected Catherine in 1505. Ferdinand made his daughter Spain's ambassador to England, which allowed her to stay in England indefinitely. Henry VII died on the 21st of April 1509, and Prince Henry became king. He declared that he would marry Catherine, trying to honour his father's dying wish. The wedding was low-key and was held on the 11th of June 1509. On the 23rd of June 1509, they had a joint coronation in Westminster Abbey, which was a grand affair. 2 days later, Henry arrested Sir Richard Epsom and Edmund Dudley, 2 of his father's most unpopular ministers. He had them charged with high treason, and they were executed in 1510. Executions would remain a popular way for Henry to remove those who displeased him. Henry returned some of the money that had been extorted by the 2 ministers. Unlike his father, Henry was moderate in his approach to potential rivals of the House of York. He pardoned several of those imprisoned by his father, but others went unreconciled, like Edmund de la Pole, who was beheaded in 1513. Catherine became pregnant soon after the wedding. She gave birth to a stillborn daughter on the 31st of January 1510. Only months later she became pregnant again and gave birth on the 1st of January 1511 to an apparently healthy baby boy, whom they named Henry. They were pleased to have a child after losing their first, and festivities were held, including a 2-day joust. However, only 7 weeks later, Prince Henry died. Catherine would suffer 2 more stillbirths in 1513 and 1515, both sons, before eventually giving birth to Mary in February 1516. By this point, relations between Henry and Catherine were deteriorating, but the birth of Mary helped improve their relationship slightly. Their final child, born in 1518, a daughter, was stillborn. Henry took mistresses throughout his many marriages. The most significant mistress of Henry was Elizabeth Bessie Blount, who gave birth to their son in June 1519, named Henry FitzRoy. He was bestowed the title of Duke of Richmond in June 1525, which some thought was one step towards Henry being made legitimate. FitzRoy died childless in 1536. At the time of his death, Parliament was considering passing the Second Succession Act, which would have allowed him to become king if he had lived long enough. Around 1510, France, in alliance with the Holy Roman Empire, was winning in a war against Venice. Henry formed a pact with Ferdinand II of Aragon, Catherine's father. In 1511, Pope Julius II created the anti-French Holy League. Ferdinand and Henry joined the league. The joint forces of the English and Spanish planned an attack on Aquitaine to recover the land for England. This attack was not led by Henry himself and was a resounding failure. Eventually, the French forces were pushed out of Italy and the alliance survived. Henry convinced the Holy Roman Emperor Maximilian to join the Holy League. In 1513, Henry invaded France and his troops defeated part of the French army at the Battle of the Spurs. The English took Aragon and gave it to Maximilian. Tournai was also taken. Due to his absence from England, James IV of Scotland invaded England. His attempt at taking over England was squashed by Catherine, who oversaw the English army at the Battle of Flodden on the 9th of September 1513. The Scottish king was killed. Despite the fact that Henry enjoyed warfare, he was forced to return to England. He had been supporting Ferdinand and Maximilian, but had received little in return for his efforts, and the English coffers were gone. Pope Leo X became the next pope after Julius, and negotiated peace with France. Henry signed his own treaty with Louis, the French king. His sister Mary would marry Louis. Peace was secured for a time. Charles V became King of Spain in 1516 and Holy Roman Emperor in 1519. Francis I became King of France in 1515. This meant that there were 3 young rulers, including Henry, of powerful countries, and a perfect opportunity for a clean slate. In an attempt at peace with France, Henry met Francis in 1520, but competition between the monarchs resulted in conflict. Charles brought Spain into war against France in 1521, and by the end of the year, Henry allied England with Spain. Charles captured Francis during the Battle of Pavia in 1525. Charles believed he owed nothing to Henry, despite Henry providing troops for Charles. Henry sensed this and took England out of the war, signing the Treaty of the Moor with France in 1525. During his marriage, Henry had an affair with Mary Boleyn, one of Catherine's ladies-in-waiting. There has been speculation that 2 of Mary's children, Henry and Catherine, were Henry's children. But as Mary was married, DNA testing was non-existent then, and Henry never acknowledged them as his own children. Their paternity remains unknown. As the second Tudor monarch, Henry VIII was desperate for a son to continue the Tudor name. By 1525, it became clear that Catherine would not be able to produce any more children, and Henry became enamoured with Mary Boleyn's sister, Anne. Anne refused to become his mistress, and Henry began to consider his options, known as the King's Great Matter. Options included legitimising Henry FitzRoy, marrying his daughter Mary off as soon as possible and hoping for a grandson to inherit directly, or annulling his marriage to Catherine and remarrying someone of childbearing age. The third option became the most appealing to Henry. Henry was a devout Catholic and had earned the title of Defender of the Faith from Pope Leo X for his publication of Defense of the Seven Sacraments. However, as time went on and he had no surviving legitimate son, Henry believed God had punished his marriage. He justified the annulment of his marriage by saying that Catherine had been married to his brother, which went against the Bible. This was used to declare the marriage null and void. However, the Pope was completely against this and refused to annul the marriage. Henry took matters into his own hands, believing the Pope to be incompetent and lacking authority. He declared himself the supreme head of the Church of England and started the English Reformation by separating the Church of England from papal authority. In 1531, Catherine was banished from court, and Anne moved into her rooms. Catherine and Henry's marriage was annulled in 1533. They had been married for 24 years, and the divorce was hard on Henry, who was still fond of his first wife to an extent. However, the need for a son made Henry justify his actions. Before Henry had formally been divorced from Catherine, Henry enlisted the support of the French king in his new marriage to Anne Boleyn. Shortly after returning from abroad, Henry and Anne were married in a secret ceremony on the 14th of November 1532. The first marriage was not considered to be fully legal, and they were wed again on the 25th of January 1533, this time in public. Anne soon fell pregnant. In May 1533, Henry's first marriage was declared null and void, and his daughter Mary was declared illegitimate. Henry and Anne's marriage was declared valid. On the 1st of June 1533, Anne was crowned queen, and she gave birth to a daughter named Elizabeth on the 7th of September 1533. Anne refused to be the submissive wife that Henry wanted. She had a violent temper, like Henry himself, and was opinionated. After suffering a miscarriage in 1534, Henry sought a solution on how to leave Anne, after she had failed to give him a son. There was opposition to the marriage and Henry's religious policies. Those who opposed him were tried for high treason and executed. In October 1536, in northern England, some 20,000 rebels, led by Robert Aske and some of the northern nobility, rose up against Henry. Henry promised that he would pardon them and thanked them for letting him know of the issues. They dispersed and went home. However, Henry lied. He saw them as traitors, and when further violence arose, he was quick to round them up and have them executed for treason. Disturbances quickly dissipated after this. In January 1536, Catherine of Aragon died, and Henry and Anne dressed in yellow to celebrate her death. Anne was pregnant again. At the end of the month, Henry was unhorsed in a tournament and was badly wounded. The news shocked the Queen, and she suffered a miscarriage of a baby boy. The accident greatly affected Henry, and he became erratic and paranoid. This sparked the beginning of the end for their marriage. Henry began to look for a new wife and took interest in Jane Seymour. He also began to look for an excuse to rid himself of Anne. Anne's behaviour at court gave Henry reason enough to believe that she was being unfaithful to him, but it is unclear whether or not she had any affairs. Most likely, Henry used the fact that his wife was overly flirtatious and friendly in her manners as an excuse. Between the 30th of April 1536 and the 2nd of May 1536, 5 men, including Anne's own brother, George Boleyn, were arrested on charges of adultery and incest. Though the evidence was unconvincing, all were found guilty and executed. Henry and Anne's marriage was annulled and Anne was arrested. She was found guilty of treason and was executed on the 19th of May 1536. Elizabeth, her only surviving child by Henry, was declared illegitimate. Once Anne was out of the picture, Henry married Jane Seymour. Just over a year later, Jane gave birth to their first and only surviving child, Edward. The labour and birth were difficult on the Queen, and she died from an infection she contracted during the birth on the 24th of October 1537. Henry had been delighted at the birth of his son and was truly in the depths of despair over the passing of his third wife. Jane was the only wife of Henry who had been given a queen's funeral. In 1536, Henry enacted the Laws in Wales Act of 1535, which annexed Wales and united Wales and England into a single nation. This law was followed by the Second Succession Act, which declared that any children Henry had with Jane would be next in the line of succession. The king could also decide who his heir was if he had no more issue and if Edward died before Henry. It took Henry some time to recover from the death of Jane, but he knew it was his duty to remarry and produce another son. Thomas Cromwell, Henry's chief minister, suggested Anne or Amalia of Cleves, the sisters of William, Duke of Cleves, an important ally in case of a Roman Catholic attack. Hans Holbein the Younger was sent to Cleves to paint a portrait of both sisters, and Henry thought Anne was the more beautiful of the two sisters in their portraits. He quickly sent for her to come to England. She arrived in England in December 1539. On New Year's Day, 1540, Henry entered her room disguised, in an attempt at a courtly love tradition. However, Anne had no idea who he was and was startled and disgusted when he suddenly embraced her and kissed her. Her response displeased Henry, but he still went ahead with the wedding on the 6th of January 1540. They never consummated their marriage. Within 6 months of the wedding, Henry annulled the marriage. Anne didn't argue against this, and she received the title of the king's sister, 2 houses, and a generous allowance. By this point, Henry was head over heels in love with Catherine Howard. Cromwell was opposed to Henry marrying Catherine, as Catherine was the niece of the Duke of Norfolk, Cromwell's rival. Cromwell fell out of favour with Henry and was charged with treason for selling export licences, granting passports, and drawing up commissions without permission. He was also blamed for the king's failed 4th marriage. He was arrested and beheaded. On the 28th of July 1540, Henry married Catherine Howard, a first cousin of his former wife Anne Boleyn. He was delighted with his new wife and awarded her Cromwell's lands and loads of jewellery. Catherine was unfaithful to her husband and carried out an affair with Thomas Culpeper. She also employed Francis Derham, a man she had slept with before her marriage, as her secretary. The Privy Council was informed of the affair and her prior relations while unmarried. Thomas Cranmer, the Archbishop of Canterbury, investigated the matter and brought the evidence of the Queen's adultery to the king. Henry did not believe him, but after Derham confessed and the Queen was questioned, Henry flew into a rage and had Catherine arrested, along with Culpeper and Derham. They were all executed. Henry's last wife was Catherine Parr, who he married in July 1543. Parr reconciled Henry with his 2 daughters and helped get them reinstated in the line of succession after Edward. She survived Henry. In 1540, Henry had the shrines to saints destroyed, and in 1542, England's remaining monasteries were dissolved with their property given to the crown. Abbots and priors lost their seats in the House of Lords. Henry and Charles, the Holy Roman Emperor's relationship improved by 1539, and Henry formed an alliance with the Emperor. He entered the Italian War in favour of the Emperor and with an invasion of France scheduled for 1543. In preparation, Henry sought to eliminate James V of Scotland. The English defeated the Scots at the Battle of Solway Moss in 1542, and the Scottish king died on the 15th of December. Henry sought to marry his son to the new Scottish queen, Mary, who was only an infant. The marriage treaty, known as the Treaty of Greenwich, was agreed on the 1st of July 1543, but was rejected by the Scottish Parliament. This resulted in an 8-year war between England and Scotland, which continued after Henry's death. Henry invaded France in 1544 with a 2-pronged attack. One force besieged Montreal to no effect, and the other attacked Boulogne, which fell in September. Henry refused to attack Paris, and Charles's campaign fizzled out and he made peace with France. France invaded England, but only made it as far as the Isle of Wight in 1545. The Treaty of Camp was signed in June 1545 to settle peace between the 2 countries. As Henry aged, he became obese and needed the help of mechanical devices to get about. He suffered from painful boils and gout. After the jousting accident of 1536, he suffered from a leg wound that never healed, preventing him from maintaining physical activity. It also affected his mental health, and he was prone to mood swings and angry outbursts. He passed away on the 28th of January 1547, on what would have been his father's 90th birthday. After his death, his 9-year-old son Edward succeeded him as Edward VI, with regents ruling for him. Henry VIII is one of England's most controversial kings. He cultivated the image of what a Renaissance man should be. Court was the centre for scholarly and artistic innovation. In order to remarry, he broke away from the Catholic Church and set England on a course towards the Reformation. He was not financially wise and caused England to become bankrupt several times. He had several successes at war, but also many losses. During his time as king, the standing army of England increased slightly, but it's with the navy that his effect as king can be seen. The Royal Navy was established under Henry VIII, and he invested heavily in warships. He set up a council for marine causes to oversee the maintenance and management of the navy. Also during his reign, the beginning of the plantations of Ireland began, and he asserted England's claim to Ireland, becoming the Lord or King of Ireland. However, what he is best known for is his 6 marriages that produced 3 monarchs of England: Edward VI, Mary I, and Elizabeth I.